And welcome back to Late Night Lately. I'm your host, Chad White. If you didn't know, this is the Late Night podcast for the website cpluscomedy.com. Like I just said, it's a website. Go there. Okay. Typically, this show starts out with a monologue, whether it's something I prepared, whether it's something I have not prepared. At this point in time, I forgot. Not that I forgot. I was rushed for time, and I did not again prepare for a monologue. I didn't write down anything. I could come up with stuff off the top of my head. I could open up the New York Times website right now, and I could talk about. I could say like, Mitch McConnell put his endorsement for Donald Trump, former President Donald Trump, for this next presidential election. And when you know it, his shell is still perfect for hiding because Mitch McConnell took a toilet. So that's like, I could do something like that. I could do something along the lines of Nikki Haley dropped out of the race as the Republican nominee for president of the United States for the 2024 election. And during her concession speech, she did not endorse Donald Trump, but she did wish him well. And wouldn't you know it? I don't know. Trump kind of liked it. He's a little bit of a masochist. I could also do something along the lines of President Joe Biden. President Joe Biden held his annual State of the Union address last night. And it was the first, and it aired across all 4 broadcast networks. And it was the first time that Fox News, that people collectively, no, see, I lost it. I lost all of my joke mojo. Hold on, let's try it again. President Joe Biden aired his annual State of the Union address last night. And in his speech, he continually prodded his predecessor in a first time for a living president. He continually prodded his predecessor, which makes sense because that's what you do when you see an animal at the zoo. You just poke it. You poke it with a stick. There you go. I lost it. I don't think I could do this a 4th time. I don't think I could do this a 4th time. Let's get into the videos that I've chosen out for this week in Late Night. It was a heck of a week. Jimmy Kimmel was off the air, and it took me until Thursday not to realize that it was off the air, but to go, why is he off the air? And then I saw, and in that time, in the interim, I've seen the commercials for the Oscars. I know he's hosting it, but I got an email in the C Plus Comedy email account, and I immediately thought, oh, that's right, he's hosting. So he and his team are busy writing jokes and producing for that show. Now, if you don't know, the host, if it's a late night host, if they are chosen to host the Oscars, the Emmys, the Golden Globes, usually their team is brought with them. I can't name a time when it didn't happen. Their team is brought with them, and they are able to use them to write the jokes, the monologues, the interstitial stuff. And that makes sense because you have a built-in team. Seth did it when he hosted. Kimmel's doing it. Fallon, Conan. I don't know what happens when it's somebody else. Like when Colin Jost and Michael Che hosted, I think, was that the Emmys? They had the SNL team to write with them, and also them to write with them. So there you go. Anyway, Kimmel was off, but a lot of great things were happening. We still have Seth celebrating the 10 years, and we also have Fallon celebrating 10 years. And I chose this clip. John Lutz, product tester, hyphen baking sheets as if it's going to come back. I don't think it's going to come back. But it was just a great esoteric sketch. If you don't know John Lutz, he's from 30 Rock. He was one of the writers in the writer's room on the show. So he was a character on the show, and he was a writer. He's also a writer in real life, and he writes for Late Night with Seth Meyers. And he did. They did a funny bit where he had to review baking sheets, but he didn't want to, and Seth forced him to. And that's the extent of it. And you know what? It was very funny, and I enjoyed it. This next clip comes from The Daily Show. We got Ronnie Chang interviewing Aquafina and vice versa about their roles in Kung Fu Panda 4. You know, I think that's a very interesting thing. And it's so great that they chose Ronnie to host for this week, obviously because the movie came out today or this week, I guess. Sounds like the cat is doing something. The dog's on the couch. And I thought that was very funny. I thought it was very funny to have them for 10 minutes just going back and forth doing a very stupid gag. And it worked. Also, Jon Stewart talked about the GOP's migrant crime narrative, quote unquote, and apparently Dr. Phil, of all people, has something to say about it, and on Joe Rogan's podcast, of all places. Dr. Phil, of all people, Joe Rogan, of all places. He's really come back into the swing of things, this Jon Stewart guy. It's so great to see him kind of slip back into the old shoe that is The Daily Show, because his Apple TV show was not this. And it wasn't like he was trying to make the Apple TV show the problem with Jon Stewart. It wasn't like he was trying to make the problem like The Daily Show. But when you're doing a job for so long, and when people expect one thing out of you, which I'm not saying I did, but that's kind of what people expect out of Colbert. It's the same thing they expect out of Jon Stewart. They want one thing. And you know what? He slipped right back in that shoe. We will. Rhett and Link stopped by the Tonight Show for the 10th time. I didn't even know who they were until a couple years ago. They appeared on a podcast I listened to. And I said, these guys are cool. I don't subscribe. It's too much. It's too much for me. These YouTubers. That goes for all of them. And then Colbert did a live episode, but I chose the monologue after the State of the Union speech. And I mean, it's just immaculate how he and his team are so good when it comes to the transition between taped and live. Because not many shows will be able to handle it. And yes, they've had time to do this, but they jumped in with the live thing fairly quickly, especially in that first year. If you remember, Jimmy Kimmel Live used to be almost live to tape, essentially. I mean, excuse me, it used to be almost live, like tape delayed. Anyway, Colbert is great. The energy is electric, and even though the crowd claps way too much, and we don't need applause breaks, we don't need that many. And also on that episode, he had a very serious person. Let me find it. John Dickerson. He did a Meanwhile segment, and then he had a live performance from De La Soul. My question is, that show is in New York, and it's live after the fact. It's what I assume is live to what they did is again a tape delay or a live to tape type deal. Because they're not shooting it at 11:15 at night. I don't think. They finished State of Union was 9 to it was about 2 hours. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, because there wasn't new Law and Order last night, unfortunately. She's a very sad person. And then there's Adam Pally. This is such a funny thing. I love it when people come to TV shows and they break stuff. They break how the show works. They break how everything is. And Adam Pally showed up. He's part of the Paramount family, so he's the plant this week. Adam Pally showed up, and just with Blair Saki and Ron Funches, who were both equally funny, along with Adam, and just wished that At Midnight was around and just kind of talked down about After Midnight. It was very funny and it just had a great callback, and he's just bothered by the at sign and everything. This is a funny episode. It's a funny episode. Okay. Now let's get to the meat. Hold on, I want to do these in order. Oh my God, they all came out at the same time. All right, well, let's do this one that came out first. This comes from the Hollywood Reporter. Written by Lacey Rose. Jimmy Kimmel talks Oscar plans, late night future, and his return of Muse Donald Trump. So if you don't know, one of the big aspects of Jimmy Kimmel Live is his wife is a producer on the show. I think she's like the senior producer, or a senior producer rather. And she helps him put together a show. Obviously, his team is doing the Oscars. So the producers come along too, and his wife is one of them. In this wide-ranging interview, they talk about Matt Damon, they talk about the Oscars, but more importantly, they talk about the Oscars. At one point, they talk about Joe Coy. And the writer writes this: Joe Coy caught a lot of flack hosting the Golden Globes, in part because he went after folks in the room and he isn't a part of the Hollywood in the way that you are. Kimmel says, it's a lot easier for me than it is for Joe Coy. It's like if a stranger walks up to you and goes, nice shirt, Tom Selleck. If it's one of your friends, you don't take offense to it, but if somebody you don't know, you might smack him one. And not that I have any business program in the Golden Globes, but I think they should let Joe Coy host the show next year and give him a shot doing it over again. Yeah, sure. He's right. You know, if Billy Crystal makes jokes about Leonardo DiCaprio or Susan Sarandon, I could not think of another woman in time. Could have said Meryl Streep. Could have said Oprah, but immediately went to Susan Sarandon, who is a great star in her own right. But he's right. It's something I've said before. I said similar things before about the Joe Coy situation. I think I was on a Constitutionals podcast where I was talking where, you know, if he just came up and was like, hey, you guys don't know me, I'm Joe Coy, you know, just introduced himself and made fun of that for him being to them an unknown. To other people who enjoy comedy, then they know who it is. They know who that is what I'm saying. They moved on about how Kimmel has a fear of standing in front of a quiet audience, but doesn't care about people really getting mad. They ask Molly if she's the one who says, you know, push further or pull back. And she says she's safer than him. This other piece, it's just a good interview. And then they talk about his future in late night. And they talk about what puts him at ease and all this stuff. But here's another good piece from Pete Hammond. Jimmy Kimmel on jokes you won't hear at the Oscars. His biggest fear for the show, his future in ABC, and the one thing he does other hosts never do. Deadline has got to be one of the ugliest websites I've ever seen for the trades. Kimmel talks about how he does enjoy hosting the show and how much time he takes to prepare. Kimmel says, for preparing, we really start in earnest when it gets announced because we can't tell anybody that we're doing it until then. So I start thinking about things. I make little notes about award shows all the time. You know, if I think of something, I put in a little folder in my computer and I refer back to that stuff when I need it. But as far as like writing specific jokes and coming up with ideas for the show, I think we started like that the day that we announced it to the press in mid-November. This is something the Oscars and the Emmys and every other award show, this is what they do better than the Golden Globes, or at least they did in this past year, because the Golden Globes did not announce Joe Coy was going to host until 2 weeks before, less than 2 weeks before. And so he didn't have time to really, he and the writers and the producers didn't really have time to put together the written part of the show. You need to, on top of like watching this stuff, you need to also, watching the shows and the movies or whatever is being judged, you also need to be able to make like a real, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. You need to be able to entertain and put together a show. Imagine if a magician came out, you're like, I'm going to go see a magician. A magician came out and they just started doing something completely off topic. He's like, hey, let me tell you about my Fortnite high score. Again, I could not think of anything else. Kimmel does not trust a group of strangers when it comes to his monologue. So he's not going to be going to comedy clubs and trying out jokes in front of an audience. He tests the jokes on people who he knows will get it, who have been to the Oscars, who will understand the dynamic, and also who will be honest with me and say like, yeah, I like that one more than this one and maybe miss this. Will he talk about Trump at some point? Maybe. Will he talk about Santos? Yeah, maybe. Let's see. There's a question in regards to, oh wow, the Barbie promo that he did on his show that involved Kate McKinnon, America Ferrera, and Ryan Gosling. People, I guess, complained and said that it looked like it was something that was, in his words, tipping the scales. Which no, the voting was over at that point. I don't think that really mattered. They talk about jokes not going over well, and he's going to blame his writers. That's funny because that's what Joe Coy did. But Kimmel did say he felt bad for Coy. All right, there you go. And then there's another one, the final one from Michael Schneider. Check out both these interviews. Jimmy Kimmel doesn't buy that he's now the Oscars' permanent host. Quote, you've assumed I've been asked. This is what, his third time, right? He's hosting the Oscars? It's not his second. It's got to be his third. Oh, this is fourth. Wow. Okay. If he came back in 2025, he would match Johnny Carson's 5 times as Oscars host. Only Billy Crystal and Bob Hope have done it more times. Wow. The 2023 Oscars were up 8% in viewers from 2022 and 1% in adults 18 to 49. This is last year. That's crazy. When Variety catches up with Kimmel a few weeks before the show, he is laser focused on locking in the telecast. He says the hardest part this is the kind of hardest part because this is when I have 3 times as much material as I need and have to figure out what to cut and what to keep. That's difficult because you do fall in love with jokes and you do hate to cut them, of course. Pre-tapes don't play as much of a role in the Oscars as they used to, Kimmel notes, and most of the production energy now goes into promos, including the one he recently did with Kate McKinnon, who revisited her role as Weird Barbie in Oscar-nominated Barbie. Yeah. Kimmel is hoping for some good acceptance speeches. He says the hardest part, and then as for hosting, he says the hardest part The hardest day really is not even the day after the Oscars. It's the Wednesday following the Oscars when pretty much everyone has forgotten them. You're running on fumes, but you still have to put on a decent show, which means he's doing Jimmy Kimmel Live next week after the Oscars. I do sometimes imagine that it would be a lot easier if I didn't have to host a nightly show while preparing for the Oscars. He doesn't know when he's going to leave late night. Anyway, hosting. Why did I close every single one of those? Jeez, I need the link to those in the show notes. There a lot goes into hosting the Oscars, especially when you're a late night host. When you have your team, more often than not, you're either you're skipping the week before, skipping work week before, or skipping the work week after. And what they usually do is they work, at least Kimmel shows what I've noticed, they work after the fact. They work after they do the big show because they have the week off. And this is just like an extra thing to have. When it's like the NBA Finals or when they have the Super Bowl on ABC, they still do an extra show. Because they do like a live for the NBA Finals, at least. They do like live half-hour shows before the games or after. No, before. The world of late night is, if late night was just like stopped, then we would be missing a lot of great, like, let's pretend SNL and all the late night shows just stopped. Who would host who could be good last minute hosts for things? Yeah, you could go get a comedian, whatever. You can get, show businessy people. But it's late night and the Oscars. They need hosts. They need hosts when it comes to these shows. I'm writing down the title of the episode. They need hosts when it comes to these last minute things, even if it's ahead of time, because you come in with built-in writers, you come in with built-in people ready to go. This is why late night rules. I think Kimmel does a fine job. He's a very funny guy and affable, and he can lead a show because he's done this for a while. Versus when you have somebody who's never hosted a show before, and I'm not talking like the, John Mulaney at the those Governor Awards or A.D. Bryant at the Gotham Film Independent Awards. I'm not talking about like when you have things like that. I'm talking about when you get somebody who's never hosted a thing in their life and they're meant to host an awards show or a TV show in general. Imagine the first year that Seth Meyers did his show, Late Night. It wasn't very good, but look at him now, 10 years later. You could give him, he's already hosted award shows, but you can give him an award show and he could pick it up and be fine. Late Night in the Oscars, that's it. Listen, if you like what you heard here, head to the website, cpluscomedy.com, where you can see me talk to your favorite people in the entertainment industry. I just did, what day is it? I did Rob Hayes. He's a very funny comedian. We talked about his album, Frontin'. It's a special as well, so you can listen to it wherever you find your comedy stuff. You can watch it on YouTube. Speaking of YouTube, you can watch a video version of this show as well as the other podcasts on youtube.com/cpluscomedy. You can also see, I don't know. The other video version of this podcast. There's the Constitutionals podcast, which is the entertainment business news podcast, and LinkedIn Logs, which is the jobs podcast. You can subscribe to those wherever you get your podcasts. You can watch the interviews, which is the interview show I have, where I talk to your favorite famous people. And you can follow us on TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at C Plus Comedy. Me at Chad Black White. And I'm sure I'm missing something else. I don't know, but you enjoy the rest of your day. I love you. Bye-bye.